Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on learning and exploring verticals of historiography. Let me introduce the speaker for this session, Dr. Mohammad Ashraf Dar, who is an assistant professor of history at Center for Distance and Online Education at Lovely Professional University. Dr. Ashraf has got his PhD in ancient Indian history, culture, and archaeology from Vikram University, Ujjain, on Buddhism in Ladakh, a historico-cultural study till 1200 CE, with JRF from Indian Council of Historical Research, New Delhi. Dr. Ashraf has worked as an assistant professor in the Department of History, Cluster University, Srinagar. He has published numerous book chapters and a book at national and international level. He has also authored many research papers published in Scopus Indexed and CARE listed journals. His area of specialization is ancient Indian history, culture, religion, and ethics. Without delaying any further, let us welcome Dr. Mohammad Ashraf.
Thank you, Arpit sir, for such a fine introduction. Good morning to all. Our today's lecture is on historiography. As you know that it's an important theme while we study the history, being the students of history. So we must be aware of the craft of drafting the history. When we use the term historiography, it actually means that how we write the history. That's very important. In the academics as well as in the competitive exams, whatsoever it is, historiography plays an important role. Now, for this very purpose, we will try to introduce the historiography initially. That always begins with the definition. So the definition of the history, as we can see, varies from field to field. It may has a brief definition, as we sometimes say that it is just the study of past, whatsoever happened in the past that we calculate as history. And this is something that we use in our daily life as well. But from the academic perspective, when we speak of the discipline of history, the definition varies a bit. So for this very purpose, I have tried to give the dictionary definition first. So from the dictionary perspective, when we try to understand history term, it's a continuous process. When we use the term continuous, what does it mean? And whether it's really related to our present day world, contemporary timers. For this very purpose, let us cite a simple example. Take the date for today. It's 21st of January. 20th of January is past. That is history in our own lifetime. Whatever we did, whatever happened yesterday, that is added as a page to our history. That's the meaning of the continuous process. Because it's not the study of period. It's actually a continuous process. That's why when we come to the division of history in the ancient, medieval, modern, so it's not limited up to 1947. But the history of the 21st century, history of 2022, 2023, which is going on. So it is added to the book of history. So every day a new page is added to the book of history. That's why we call it a continuous process. Second is the systematic narrative of past events as relating to a particular people. Now, this narration is not random. For example, when we study about the first civilization in Indian context, that's Harappan civilization or Indus Valley civilization. When we reconstruct its past, we do not go for the random hypothesis. When we say that it was an urban center, so for that very purpose, we have the evidences in the form of trade. And for that very purpose, those seals, you might recall right now, they play a crucial role. We have the urban centers where we have the stratification of the society. Most of the people who are dwelling in the cities, they are non-agrarian. At the same time, we have a strong agrarian base to support this urban style. What I mean to say is that whenever we reconstruct the past, it is systematic, it's not random, it's not based on hearsay. Now, this history, when we reconstruct the history, it may belong to a particular group of people. For example, when we study the history of the Aryans, or it may be related to a country. When we say the history of India, or it may be related to a period, as we say the Vedic period, and you might be knowing that Vedic period lasted from 1500 to 600 BC. In the meantime, it has another period, that's later Vedic period, from 1000 before Common Era to 600 before Common Era. Or it may be simply related to a person. It means there is super specialization within the domain of history. You may have a general history, for example, history of the world. You may have a general history of India, but there is history at local level as well. That's why you come across the history of Raja Ram Mohan Rai, a special king, for example, Satvahans, Karkotas, Utpalas, Pushyabhutis, etc. So it's not a general term. There is room for the super specialization as well. It's actually navigation from general to specific or local. Now, when we record the historical events, they are not written in an haphazard manner. They are written chronologically. There is chronology is followed. For example, invasion of Alexander in 326 before Common Era, that will be recorded first. And after it, we will be having the establishment of the Mauryan Empire. That's in 321 before Common Era. It's not haphazard that we will discuss Mauryan period first and it will be followed by the invasion of Alexander. No, there is the need of chronology. You have to record the events in order. Order is very important for the history. And this is also the definition for the chronicle. You might have come across a lot of chronicles as sources in the history. And those chronicles are believed to be written following the chronology of events which took place in that period. Now, this is the dictionary meaning of the historiography. If we will go to the literal meaning of the history as drawn from the Historia written by Herodotus, it simply means knowledge acquired by investigation and inquiry. If you will see, this definition provides scientific clout to the history because it's the knowledge which is acquired after investigation. It's not just the collection of knowledge. Without scrutinizing the sources the information is flowing from. So, being the students of history, we need to remember that whenever we speak about history, it's actually we are speaking about the knowledge, which is acquired knowledge, because there are two types of knowledge. In the historical studies, we come across certain sources which are known as revealed sources, and that's the knowledge which is not acquired by experience. That is simply revealed. But when we speak of history, and in the forthcoming slides, we will come across the different strands in the historiography. So it will be clear to you that why we have different notions of history, why we have a Western notion, and why Indian notion is altogether different from that. To understand that, we need to understand this meaning of history, which is knowledge acquired by investigation and inquiry. When we use the term investigation in historical studies, it means the sources that you are drawing inspiration or information from, you need to scrutinize them, whether they are truly the sources or not. And for that very purpose, as we come across many types of sources, that's we have the archaeological sources, we have the literary traditions, we have the inscriptions, we have the numismatic sources. So we have to scrutinize them. And after this scrutinization, we may fetch the knowledge that can make justice with the historical tradition. When it comes to the general domain, it is simply the study of past. When you study about the past, when you study about 1947, when you study about 1757, 1857, that is considered the historical study. I hope this slide is clear. If there is any doubt in this slide, because in order to make this session interactive, and I know that historiography is an important theme in all your semesters, in all your courses. So if there is any doubt, you may raise your hand, and I will try to clear the doubts instantly. Okay, so if there's any doubt, do raise your hand and ask freely. Now, after it, second thing is, this is the basic edifice of the historical studies. There are 5 W's. We will try to understand the historical edifice, the structure of the history on the basis of 5 W's. And these 5 W's will help us to understand what actually is the objectivity, causation, and journalization in history. So first of all, we will try to understand journalization, because these are the terms that you will come across in the historiographical study. Journalization is a process, and in this process, we frame principles as well as theories, as well as the concepts, in order to develop a fact. So the principles, theories, concepts, they are stringed together to form a fact. Second thing is causation. Causation is strictly in line with the Western notion of history. And according to this notion, there is always a cause that initiates an event, and that event has consequences, and it goes on in a linear manner. Third thing, which is very important, and that gives the scientific nature to historical studies, is the objectivity. By objectivity, we mean in history that whatsoever narrative there is, it's based on facts. And for that very purpose, we need a thorough analysis of sources without any favoritism. That may be on the basis of race, on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion. So whatsoever we are writing or we are speaking, we are analyzing about the past, it must be unbiased. There must be no bias in it. That's why, on the basis of objectivity, when the historical sources are scrutinized, we consider those chronicles which were patronized by the officials as well as kings. We see them with suspicion because the chances of bias are more in such narratives. Now, to understand these five W's, I have cited an event, extremely important event of the Indian history belonging to the ancient India. That is the Kaling War. It's important because it transformed Ashoka from being a Bhari Ghosha to a Dhamma Ghosha, or using the Dhamma Vijaya. He shunned the violence and preached the Dhamma after this event. So the first W is what it was. So what actually the event was? So the event was Kaling War. Second thing is when it occurred or happened. So it happened in 261 before Common Era. In the meantime, in the historical studies, the students often face hardships in remembering the dates. But if you will study an event thoroughly, it's not a problem at all. Three events can be remembered by simply remembering this date, 261. Before it, we have important event, that's 321, establishment of the Mauryan Empire. And before that, we have 326, that's the invasion of Alexander. Likewise, in the modern domain, for modern history, you can remember the dates like, for example, we have 1757, Plassey, 64, Buxar, 1857. That's the first war of independence, which is known by many historians. So these events have some similarity that may help us in remembering the dates. So when is important? When the event happened or occurred. It's 261 before Common Era. Who was involved in this event? For example, if there's an event, okay, so there are some actors who perform this event. There are the parties, because it's a war. So we have the kings from both sides who are fighting a war. So it was Ashoka. Here you will see that I have placed H in the brackets. When we write the Sanskrit terms, when there is transliteration, so sometimes you will see only S, it carries the sound of sh. So it's Ashok. Okay. Where it happened, that's the place of the event. It's Kaling in present day Odisha. And the most important thing, that's why, what was the reason for this war? For Ashoka, it was expansion of empire that we come across in the historical studies whenever there is a war. So the basic aim behind the war, mostly it is the expansion of empire. And expansion of empire, that's the journal reason for it. There may be certain sub-reasons as well. For example, strategic location of Kaling, as well as its control over the Southeast Asian trade. So these five W's tell us about the Kaling War. In the same manner, we have to describe the events of history. And when we describe the events in this manner, that's we are doing historiography. We are writing the history. So historiography is the history of history, how to write the history, how the history has been written. Now, beneath you can see an important definition by E.H. Carr. It's recorded in his famous book, What's History? This is one of the most important books on the historiography. You may consult it. It's very important. So it's a continuous process of interaction between historian and his facts. So historian is the person who is writing the event, who is narrating the event, and he's narrating the event on the basis of the facts he is having. That's it, on the basis of the sources, historical sources. Then it's an unending dialogue between the present and the past. As I told you initially, that it's an unending dialogue. It's continuous. There is no end to it. I hope this slide is also clear. If there is any doubt regarding this slide, you may raise your hand. In fact, for all the slides, whenever you feel that there's any doubt or you need to know more about it, you can raise your hand instantly. Now we are coming to the Greco-Roman tradition, one of the most important traditions of the historiography. It may be considered the beginning of the historiography. Okay. So the date when it began is 5th century before Common Era. When we use the term 5th century, what does it mean? It actually means the date was 400, because when there is 400, that's 5th century. Like in the contemporary times, because we have 2023, this is 21st century. So it began in Greece. Okay, that's why we call it Greek. Then we have some Roman historians as well, belonging to the almost same period. That's why this tradition is known as Greco-Roman tradition. So remember the date, 5th century before Common Era, and this 5th century before Common Era, it's very important in the Indian history as well. This was the period when we were experiencing second urbanization in India. Simply, it was the zenith period of the Iron Age in India. Now, the most important historians belonging to this Greco-Roman tradition are Herodotus, he is known as the father of history. Then we have Thucydides, we have Livy, and we have Tacitus. Among these, Herodotus is famous, as well as he is known as the father of history. So this was the initial effort to write the history as we discussed it in the earlier slides, with objectivity, with the proper chronology. These were the features to be followed while narrating history. Okay, so Herodotus was the first among them. That's why he is known as the father of history. There may be, some reservations as well why we should call him the father of history. This is the beginning of the historiographical trend. That history must be like this, so he was the first to make an effort in this direction. In many ways, when we consider him as the father of history, he's regarded as the father of history because he invented the yardstick or the parameter to know the factuality or the objectivity of the history. The narrative he wrote, the Historia, it has the features that we consider essential for being objective, and these are based on causation. That's why we call him the father of history. Now we can understand these facts from the introduction of his work. He writes, these are the researches of Herodotus, of Halicarnassus, that's Bodrum in the modern Turkey, which he publishes in the hope of thereby preserving from decay the remembrance of what men have done, and preventing the great and wonderful actions of the Greeks and the barbarians from losing their due meed of glory, and withal to put on record what were their grounds of feud. So this is the introduction. And in this introduction, he tries to show us the importance of the history, that why I am writing the history. The initial aim is preserving the great memories of the past from decay. You will see the same in every region of the world, and everybody is proud of his historical heritage. Now, in the Indian context, when we study about history, we have one famous work. Can you tell me the name of that work? That's very famous as history, which was recognized a history by the colonial historians as well. Can you tell me the name of that book, that work? Anybody? Anybody? When we are studying about the Herodotus, that he wrote the Historia, he developed the basic parameters for writing the objective history. It's not that we do not have any such historical tradition in India. We have the first work that was written in Sanskrit language, which was considered the truly historical narrative by the colonial historians. Can you name that book? Anybody? Anyone? Okay. So I will tell you the name of the work, but with the hope that you will remember the name. It's Raj Tarangni, which was written by Kallan. So Raj Tarangni is the work that has recorded the events in the chronology that follows the parameters which were established by Herodotus like historian. Now, in this narrative, you will come across another term that's known as barbarian. These were the people who were fighting with the Greeks, and they were the Persians. So according to Herodotus, the aim of the history is to preserve the past memories, the events that have taken place in the past, because according to him, the events which have took place in the past, they are responsible for shaping the future. So the events of the past play a crucial role in shaping the future. That was the importance of the history. That's why he was writing the history. So according to this, the history, only those events are recorded which are important. And you will see the same feature when we will discuss the Indian historiographical traditions. Remember this tradition that only the important events were, recorded. You will see the same in the Indian historiographical tradition that we will come across in the forthcoming slides. Now at the bottom, you will see this is a screenshot of the front page of the Historia of Herodotus. And as I told you, it was in the 5th century. So here you will see the date 484. This is the 5th century. And the work that he wrote is known as Historia. After Herodotus, we have another important historian belonging to this Greco-Roman tradition. His name was Thucydides. Now, the account of the Thucydides, you may consider it was a practical event. He was the eyewitness of the events that he was recording. In the Historia of Herodotus, you will come across certain events that you will see they are mythological. especially regarding the gold digging ants. Thucydides was also a Greek. He belonged to Athens, so he was an Athenian. He wrote the history of an important event, which was a war between the Athenians and the Peloponnesians. And Thucydides was an eyewitness to this war. So when we categorize the sources, this is the primary source of the Peloponnesian War. According to Thucydides, this war was going to be great. Now, wars can't be great, but we use the term great wars. It only means that the repercussions or the consequences of these wars will transform the world ahead. In the contemporary times, we know about the wars. So we have two world wars. They have been fought. And we know that the consequences of these wars, they transformed the whole world. The impact of these wars was not regional in nature, it was global in nature. That's why we use the term great wars as well as world wars for them. In the same line, Thucydides believed that the war between the Athenians and the Peloponnesians, it is going to be great. Now remember the sense of future in it, because it's very important when we will try to analyze the Indian historical tradition, there you will see the same thing in the context of the Purans, the future sense. It's going to be. We do not, we need to remember that he was an Athenian and he also served during this war. But because of some reasons, he was exiled. So we need to remember these situations while analyzing his account, whether he was having any grudge against the Athenians who exiled him, or out of that nationality, he was having the bias against the Peloponnesians. We do not need to forget these factors while analyzing the narrative of Thucydides. Now, in this work, you will see the speeches. Out of these speeches, some were delivered before the war, while others were delivered during the war when the war was going on. And Thucydides was a witness because he was among the audience to hear these speeches. And finally, he knew the end of the war. And out of these situations, the situations that developed within the war, he was exiled as well. Now, the narrative of both Herodotus and Thucydides tell us that they were a part of the society, and whatsoever was happening, it was happening before their eyes. So it was the first-hand the eyewitness account, especially in case of the Thucydides. Then coming to the Roman historiography, because we call it Greco-Roman, so we have discussed two Greek historians, and now we will discuss two these Roman historians. Among the Roman historians, the first one we have, his name was Livy, and you will see the date 64 BC, that's the first century. Regarding Livy, we need to remember that he was not a member of the senatorial elite. As we see in case of the other historians, like Calhoun, we consider his narrative authentic because he was not part of the court. So his narrative was not for pampering the king. Same may be seen in case of Livy as well. He was not a member of the Senate. In order to understand the narration of Livy, let's try to read the preface of the Livy as we discussed about Herodotus. So he writes, I invite the reader's attention to the much more serious consideration of the kind of lives our ancestors lived, of who were the men and what the means both in politics and war, by which Rome's power was first acquired and subsequently expanded. I would then have him trace the process of our moral decline to watch first the sinking of the foundations of morality as the old teaching was allowed to lapse. Now, these are very important liners because when we will discuss the Indian tradition of historiography, they play a crucial role in it. He compares the past with the present, and he finds the moral decline. Now, remember, it's moral decline, it's not the material decline. From material perspective, there may be development, there may be progress, but from the moral perspective, there is lapse. Now, the final collapse of the whole edifice and the dark dawning of our modern day, when we can neither endure our vices nor face the remedies needed to cure them. This is altogether a different perspective. The main aim of Livy is not to record the events because they are important, but rather it's a comparative process where he compares the past with the present and tries to find the reasons for the decline of the present and the glory of the past. You need to remember this as we will approach towards the Indian tradition. We will come across almost the same thing there on the basis of which we do not have a linear historiographical tradition in the Indian context. Now, after it, we have Tacitus, almost the same period. He was associated with the imperial administration and he was a great orator. He wrote annals. We use the term annals in the historiographical tradition as the recording of the events annually. So there is proper, recording of the events yearly. As you see, some of the government agencies, they record the events yearly. There is complete statement what happened in this year, and on this basis the planning is made for the future. His annals delineated the history of the Roman Empire for about 50 years. So we have a complete narrative of the Roman Empire from circa 14 and 65 Common Era. And we have a statement from Tacitus as well. So now, after a revolution, when Rome is nothing but the realm of a single despot, there must be good in carefully noting and recording this period, for it is but few who have the foresight to distinguish right from wrong, or what is sound from what is hurtful. Here you will see there are reasons for what is happening and the present condition. The reasons are cited for it. But we also come across a sense of future in it as well. From these four historians, what we learned, because I have selected these four historians, they are unique in their narration. One, that's Thucydides, he was narrating the events, he was a part of which. So these were the first-hand experience or the eyewitness accounts. Regarding Herodotus, he was recording the events which were important, and the events were not necessarily of his period. Then we have Livy. He was writing the history independently. He was not a part of the Senate. Then we have Tacitus. He was part of the Senate, and he was an orator as well. So, being an orator, we may expect ornate nature in his statements. From the study of these four historians, we come to the conclusion that what were the chief features of this tradition of historiography. So, first one that from Herodotus we learned was the preserving of the memories. So, Herodotus was preserving the memories that we learned about him. Second is substantialism. Only those things which were unchanging that you can know. It's a bit carrying the philosophical affinity of history. So unchanging is not historical. Anything that passes through the transition is historical. It's the statement of Collingwood. For example, if anything is substantial, it's fixed, it's not changing. So it will not change. It was as it is in 1910, it will be the same in 1950. So there will be nothing of any historical importance in it. So being transitional is important to be historical. Second thing, these historians were writing for elite readers. You know, especially we have one of the finest examples in the Indian history regarding this elite readership. You might have come across the important features of Buddhism, the language. It was Pali and Prakrit. It was not Sanskrit because it was the language of the common masses. So the message of Buddha or Jaina, it reached to the common masses. While Sanskrit was limited, it was having, you know, limited readership, and as well as there were only a group of people who used this language, who can understand this language. These historians, they were writing for these elites. So readership was from the elites. Another thing is there was diversity in the sources they consulted. So whatsoever they were writing, it was based on the sources. For example, whether it was about the war, whether it was about any past important event, there were sources for this purpose. And for that very purpose, you will see that Herodotus has traveled as well. As in the contemporary times, when we go for some research, so we have the field study, we go to the spot where some event has taken place, and we try to collect the information which is there. And on that basis, we may write something about that event. Okay, is it clear regarding the Greco-Roman tradition? Is there any question? So kindly raise your hand so that I can clear that out. किसी का कोई सवाल है यहाँ तक जो ग्रीको रोमन ट्रेडिशन हमने पढ़ा है? इफ देयर इज एनी लिंगुअल इशू प्लीज टेल मी. जो ग्रीको रोमन ट्रेडिशन है इसके बारे में किसी का कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो वो हैंड रेज कर सकते हैं, पूछ सकते हैं. कोई क्वेश्चन इससे रिलेटेड, ग्रीको रोमन ट्रेडिशन से रिलेटेड? आज जो जनरल फर्स्ट टू स्लाइड्स थी अबाउट द हिस्टोरिकल इवेंट्स जिसमें 5 Ws हैं, तो उससे रिलेटेड कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो आप पूछ सकते हैं. एनीवन? किसी का कोई सवाल यहां तक? हाँ, यस, बेंजामिन, you have any question? So we have a question from Monu Sharma, right? How there is no change expected? That's question number one. Any other question till here? किसी और का कोई सवाल है? Monu, are you there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I hope. Okay, okay. Thanks for the response. जब हम सबस्टेंशियल की बात करते हैं, सबस्टेंशियल नेचर की बात करते हैं, दैट व्हाटसोएवर इज नॉट चेंजिंग, तो यहाँ पे दो चीजें आपको माइंड में रखनी है कि जिस एम्पायर की हम बात कर रहे हैं, इट वाज कंसिडर्ड सो दैट इट विल रिमेन ऑलवेज. कुछ इंस्टीट्यूशंस ऐसे जैसे जो कॉलोनियलिज्म था, ब्रिटिश कॉलोनियलिज्म था, तो उसमें आपको पता है दैट इट्स एम्पायर ऑन व्हिच द सन नेवर सेट्स. ठीक है. एंड सेकेंड थिंग इज, अगर सोसाइटी में कोई चीज है, कोई ट्रेडिशन है, लेकिन ये फिक्स्ड है, इसमें कोई चेंज नहीं आ रही है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ किंगशिप, अगर ये हेरिडिटरी है और उसमें कोई चेंज नहीं आ रही है, बाप के बाद उसका बेटा किंग बन जाता है, सो दिस इज हेरिडिटरी. सो it's a fixed thing. There is no change in it. So when I use the term unchanging, it's in this sense. Is it clear, Monu? Is it clear? Monu, is it clear? Or you need further explanation? Okay, great. Thank you. Any other question? कोई और सवाल इससे related? यहाँ तक जो ग्रीको रोमन ट्रेडिशन इससे रिलेटेड, बिकॉज आई नो आपके तकरीबन सभी कोर्सेज में इससे रिलेटेड क्वेश्चंस आते हैं, सो आई विश के पूरी तरह से क्लियर हो जाए. ओके, तो हम let's move towards the next slide, which is regarding the Chinese historiography. ठीक है, अब हम चाइनीज हिस्टोरियोग्राफी की तरफ बढ़ते हैं, और चाइनीज हिस्टोरियोग्राफी जो है वो भी काफी इंपॉर्टेंट है. और लास्ट पे हम इंडियन ट्रेडिशन या इंडियन हिस्टोरियोग्राफी विल डिस्कस दैट वेरी पार्ट. अगर बीच में कोई भी इश्यू है, जैसे लैंग्वेज का कोई इश्यू है, लैंग्वेज में कोई प्रॉब्लम आ रही है, तो आप उससे रिलेटेड भी क्वेश्चन रेज कर सकते हैं. ठीक है, बिकॉज आई विश कि जो सेशन हमारा हो, इससे हमारा हिस्टोरियोग्राफी का ये तकरीबन क्लियर हो जाए, ये तीन ट्रेडिशंस हम क्लियर कर सकें, कोई डाउट इसमें ना रहे. ओके, सो आई एम एक्सपेक्टिंग ऑल द स्टूडेंट्स टू रेज द हैंड्स व्हेरेवर दे फील कि कोई डाउट है, देयर इज एनी क्वेश्चन, दे मे आस्क एनी टाइम. ओके, so regarding the Chinese tradition, a Chinese historiography, the first person that we come across is the great historian. So we call him Sima Qian or Sima Qian. In Chinese, you know that the phonetic set's a bit different. So he belonged to the period 145 to 86 BCE. Second to first century before Common Era. We use BCE, before Common Era, because this is more secular. Prior to it, we use it BC as well as AD. That's before Christ and Anno Domini in the year of Lord. So now this trend is followed. BC for BC, before Common Era, and CE for AD, that's Common Era. Regarding the Chinese historiography, he was the pioneering author. He may be considered the first historian of China. सबसे पहला historian उसे मान सकते हैं. And the work that goes to his credit is known as Shiji, which means records of the grand historian. And it belongs to first century before Common Era. जैसे हमने हेरोडोटस, लिवी, टैकिटस या थ्यूसिडाइड्स के बारे में देखा, दैट दे रोट इनिशियली व्हाट दे आर एमिंग एट, अपना मकसद उन्होंने बयान कर दिया, दैट व्हाई वी आर राइटिंग हिस्ट्री, व्हाट्स आवर एम बिहाइंड राइटिंग द हिस्ट्री. सो वी विल सी व्हाट Sima Qian has to say. I have gathered up and brought together the old traditions of the world which were scattered and lost. So he has collected them. they were scattered, they were lost. So he has collected them. So this is the collection. I have examined the deeds and events of the past and investigated the principles behind their success and failure. So there is an event. कोई event हुआ है, and he not only collected that event, but he also investigated कि यहाँ पे जो सक्सेस है वो क्यों हुई थी, and why there was failure, what were the reasons, causation, what were the cause for the success, or what was the cause for the failure. So this is not the random collection that I was telling you in the very first slide of this PPT, that it's not the random collection. It is collection of the factors, and facts comes to forefront by investigation, their rise and decay. So he is trying to learn from the past that what leads to success and what leads to failure. When we say that history is like a mirror in which we can see our future, it only means that we may learn from the failures that happened before us. क्यों ऐसा क्यों हुआ था, इस बैटल में उन्होंने क्यों हारा था, व्हाट वर द रीजंस, तो हम वो रिपीट ना करें, सो द हमारा जो रिजल्ट वो फेलियर ना हो, वो सक्सेस हो. जब आप किसी इवेंट में जो चीजें डिटरमाइनिंग होती हैं विच लीड्स टू फेलियर, अगर आप वो उनमें से निकाल देंगे तो वो फेलियर की जगह सक्सेस बन जाएगा. दिस इज लर्निंग फ्रॉम द पास्ट. I wish you to examine into all that concerns heaven and man, to penetrate the changes of the past and the present. So it's not totally acquired knowledge. Here we can see the flavor of the religion as well. Okay. Now, regarding this work, we have some comments as well. So the comment is the most complete and unbroken record of its past possessed by any people. This is W.T. de Barry. He comments about the Shiji, or the work of Sima Qian. Now, there were certain factors why history was being written in China, or what encouraged it. Exactly. मोनू शर्मा, हाँ, जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल पास्ट में कोई इवेंट हुआ है, ठीक है, तो वहां पे उसका रिजल्ट फेलियर हुआ है, तो उसके जो फैक्टर्स हैं विच लेड टू द फेलियर. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर हम एक इवेंट लेंगे, इंडियन हिस्ट्री का लेंगे इवेंट, दैट इज द 1757 बैटल ऑफ प्लासी. So we know what were the reasons that led to the failure of सिराजुद्दौला. तो उसके बाद 1764 में इन द बैटल ऑफ बक्सर, इफ इट वाज लर्न्ड कि इन फैक्टर्स की वजह से वो हारे हैं, वो उनको रिपीट नहीं करते तो वहां पे हार नहीं होती. दैट्स व्हेन यू लर्न फ्रॉम हिस्ट्री, और इट्स रिलेटेड टू आवर लाइफ एज वेल. For example, in cracking any examination, we made some blunders. Now, next time we are not going to repeat them. If we are not going to repeat them and we are cherished with success, that's we have learned from the past. If we are repeating those blunders and we are facing failure every time, that's we are not learning from the past. That is the message of Sima Qian in his Shiji. Okay, is it clear? Okay, I hope it's clear. If there's any further doubt, any suggestion you may. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the response. Now, among these factors, we have the major factor, that's Confucianism. This Confucianism developed humanism, reverence for past, moral education, order. Humanism simply means that man was brought at center. What does it mean that man was brought at center? Can anybody tell me that what is humanism? Or what does it mean when we say that man was brought at center? आप में से कोई इसका जवाब दे सकता है? Anybody? ह्यूमनिज्म के बारे में आपने कभी सुना है या इसके बारे में आप क्या जानते हैं? जब हम कहते हैं मैन एट सेंटर, व्हाट डज इट मीन? एनी आइडिया? एनीवन among the attendees? Anyone? You will see the same thing in the Renaissance as well. Bringing man at center means what concerns man, that's more important. Reverence for past, it means past was golden order. And remember it, please. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Thanks for the response. So past was great, it was golden. And remember it because it will be very, important to understand the Indian tradition of historiography. Third one is the moral education. That's morality is more important. In fact, you will see all the religions of the world, you may find differences which have been developed, but you will see that all the religions of the world, they teach morality. None of the religions of the world will teach immorality. Every religion teaches morality. So morality is very important. This is the essence of man. A man must be moral. That's the essence of being human. Okay. And in the order we have cause and effect. This is very much related to our historiography. So these things, they developed the sense of historiography in China. They are considered the factors which developed the historiography in China. Now this Confucianism, what it is actually, it's the name given to the teachings of Confucius. He was a 6th century before Common Era scholar of China. It may be considered or may not be considered a religion, because when we define religion, so whether all those parameters, according to those parameters, does it qualify to be called a religion or not? It's more related to the ethics, it's more related to the morality than the rituals, other things. So Confucianism was an important factor that led to the sense of historiography in China. Now, the first thing that's a feature of the Chinese historiography, it is the history in China, it was written by the scholars. Now, these scholars were officials as well. Here we need to remember when we use the term scholar, so you are expecting more factual information from him. Official, simply a official is different, and a scholar official is different. If you are a scholar, so truth is expected from you, factual information is expected from you. And they were officials as well. Now, the history of China, it reflected the concerns of the imperial state, which the scholar official class served. So it revolves around these imperial court or the concerns, what the king was thinking, what was happening in the court, or what were the suggestions given by the scholars to the kings. So it may not be considered totally purely a courtly narrative, but it certainly was related to the imperial court. Now, when it was related to the imperial court, so one of the basic functions of the history was to uphold the legitimacy of the emperor as well as the dynasty, because in China we have the dynasties. Whenever you will study the history of China, so you will come across the Han dynasty. There are histories are dynastic in nature. We have every dynasty with a history. So one of the basic aims of these histories were to uphold the legitimacy of the emperor. And when we consider upholding the legitimacy of the emperor, so you cannot expect 100% factuality. You can't say that these narratives are devoid of the bias. There may be bias because they have to uphold the legitimacy. But if something is written out of the court, there we need to be cautious as well. Whether there isn't any grudge against the person the history is being written. So we need to be very careful while dealing with these sources. Now, the Confucian or the Confucianism, it emphasized on rule by virtue. It means that it was enough for an emperor to base his right to rule on his de facto hold on power. In the Indian context and the Persian historiography, we come across these terms as well. So we have most of the sources that you will see, they pop up from the courts. They were written under the patronage of the rulers, emperors, etc. So there is no difference in it as well. But with the passage of time, there was a bit transformation as well. Now, from the superficial level, there seems no difference from the normal code traditions as well as the Chinese historiography. Then what makes it credible? Where the credibility of these sources lie? As I told you, there was bias because they have to uphold the legitimacy of the emperor. Chinese historiography often evinced a degree of objectivity that was remarkable in the circumstances. Now, whatsoever is narrated here, it is based on causation. There is objectivity in it. There is a cause given that leads to an event, and then we have the consequences. For example, Zizi Tongjian, he illustrates the extent to which official historiographers could, if they were determined, maintain their independence of judgment. So Zizi Tongjian, he finds enough space while writing the imperial history for being objective as well. So it was not totally in the clutches. He can go for objectivity. He can narrate the facts. He can cite the causes of any event. And that will make it objective for the readers because readers will understand that if these were the causes and these were the events, what would have been the nature of the event. That makes the statement a bit credible. Otherwise, there is hardly any difference as we have in the court traditions here. All these things I'm telling you because you will see these features in the Indian historiographical traditions as well. And at that time, you may recall that it happened with the Chinese historiography as well. So we can understand that what was the level of the Indian historiographical tradition at par with these traditions, whether there was any comparison with these or not. Shall we follow the colonial tradition that we do not have any historical sense? Whether we were having any historical sense or not, that's what objectivity means, and we will find the reasons for that. Okay. The Tang dynasty emperor Taizong, whenever you have T and S together, it normally means spoke to the imperial censor. This is an important thing here. It's really important. We need to remember it. Just remember it. This censor. It's really important. Imperial censor, he was a person who used to criticize the king for any misdeed. For example, if king has taken a decision that's not in favor of the empire or in favor of the people, so there was a person, there was an office, censorate, and he can criticize the king for this. Now, this imperial nature was not like we have the, despots. We do not find any such institution where anybody can criticize the king. Because if you have an institution which can criticize the king, it's like in the democracy, we have the judiciary, we have the legislation. Only one person can say this will happen. No, we have so many people, they can criticize you. That is the beauty of democracy. Or rather, that's the essence of the democracy. And here in the monarchy, you have an office that has the right to criticize the king, that censor office. So we have Sui Liang. He says, since you, sir, are in charge of the diaries of action and repose, that is the edited notes of the emperor's activities maintained by the court historians, may I see what you have written? This is very important even. These lines are very important. You will understand the kernel of the Chinese historiography from these lines. Sui Liang replied, the historiographers record the words and deeds of the ruler of men, nothing down all that is good and bad, and in hopes that the ruler will not dare to do evil. But it is unheard of that the ruler himself should see what is written. The emperor said, if I do something that's not good, do you then also record it? Sui Liang, my office is to wield the brush. How could I dare not record it? Dare not record it. Remember it. The gentleman of the Yellow Gate, one of the courtiers, Luigi added, even if Sui Liang failed to record it, everyone else in the empire would. To which the emperor replied, true. Now, this is the situation. So these historians, whatsoever, on the basis of this account, if taking this as a factual, because whatsoever we are journalizing afterwards, it all depends upon this statement. If this statement is true, then whatsoever we are saying for इसके बाद जो भी हम कह रहे हैं ना, वो तभी सच है जब ये सच है ना? That's very important. So here you will see that the office of these historians, they used to record all the deeds, whether these deeds were good or they were bad. And in this context, आप देखेंगे यहाँ पे जब किंग पूछता है कि can I see what you have recorded? Even he is not allowed to see what has been recorded. And then he asks us, if I will do a misdeed, if I will do some bad deeds, whether it will be recorded. So the response is very impressive. It will be recorded. And other person says that if this censor will not record it, everyone else will record it. So this is the basis on which the Chinese historiography is considered authentic. This is the credibility of this narration. Otherwise, you will see they are also the courtiers. They write the imperial histories. It's for the legitimization of the emperor, the dynasty. But we have these features as well. And we compare these features in all these three traditions, Indian tradition, Chinese, as well as Greco-Roman, whether these features were there or not. You can understand. For example, though we have the democracies now, when there were monarchies, all the powers were wielded in one hand. So how daring it was to record the misdeeds of the emperor. And when we have the institutions in such monarchies who were assigned the task to record the facts, whether they were in favor of the king or against him, they were allowed to record it. That's very important, isn't it? Isn't it? On this basis, we consider the Chinese historiography, the narrations of these grand historians, as objective, full of objectivity. Okay? Is it clear till here? अगर किसी का कोई सवाल वगैरह हो, अगर इफ देयर इज एनी लिंग्विस्टिक बैरियर, लैंग्वेज का कोई प्रॉब्लम हो, तो आप मुझे बता दीजिए. ओके, थैंक यू मोनिका. ओके, ओके, थैंक्स. So we'll continue to the next slide. Now we come across some historical theories. मैं चाहता हूं कि आप इस स्लाइड को ज्यादा ध्यान से देखें, because it's very much related to the Indian tradition of historiography. You will come across almost same theme there, so it will help you in understanding the Indian historiography in better terms. What was the theoretical framework for Chinese historiography? Even those historians who claim complete neutrality take recourse to journal principles to organize their material. History writing in pre-modern China was no exception. So, first theory is dynastic circle, as dynastic cycle. According to Chinese tradition, the first ruling family of China were the Xie, who were overthrown by Shang, who were replaced in turn by the Zhou, and so on. So actually, they believe in a process, which is a cyclical process. एक dynasty, they usurp the throne, हुकूमत करती है, फिर और एक डायनास्टी इनको रिप्लेस करते, और ये साइकिल्स में प्रोसेस चलता है, एंड इट विल कंटिन्यू. इट मींस कि कोई एक डायनास्टी जो वो हमेशा के लिए नहीं रहने वाली है, इट विल बी रिप्लेस्ड, बिकॉज दिस इज द लॉ, दिस इज द डायनास्टिक सर्कल. एक डायनास्टी आती है, फिर दूसरी आती है, फिर तीसरी आती है. एज यू विल सी, Indian context maybe, we have the Mauryans, okay, then we have the Guptas, we have the Satvahans, okay, we have the Pushya Bhuttis, then towards the medieval we have the slave dynasty, okay, then we have the Khilji dynasty, Tughlaq dynasty, Lodi dynasty, Mughal dynasty. So it keeps on going. एक theory थी, whatsoever they are writing, it was related to it, कि एक डायनेस्टी आएगी, फिर उसके बाद दूसरी आएगी, फिर उसके बाद तीसरी आएगी. सो हियर इज प्रीकंसीव्ड, ये पहले ही समझ लेते थे कि ये डायनेस्टी जो है इट विल फॉल एंड अनदर डायनेस्टी विल रिप्लेस इट. इट्स नॉट कि ये हमेशा के लिए रहेगी, ऐसा नहीं है. जब इंडियन ट्रेडिशन में हम देखेंगे, बाद में जो हिस्टोरियोग्राफिकल ट्रेडिशन रहा है, तो उसमें आप देखेंगे, या फिर वहीं पे देख लीजिए जो कॉलोनियल पावर्स वगैरह, तो वहां पे ऐसा नहीं था. वो इस पे बिलीव नहीं करते थे दैट इट विल हैपन, कोई और आएगा इसकी जगह रिप्लेस करेगा. वो लीनियर चलता था, ये साइक्लिकल चलता है. राइज एंड फॉल ऑफ डायनास्टीज फॉलोड ए क्लियरली डिफाइंड पैटर्न. तो मान लीजिए एक पाथ बनाई गई है, एक ट्रैक बनाया गया है, विच इज साइक्लिकल. उस पे एक डायनास्टी की ट्रेन वो चल रही है, इट विल कम टू द हाल्ट, अनदर ट्रेन विल बिगिन ऑन द सेम ट्रैक, और इसी तरह से कंटिन्यू रहेगा. एंड दीज थिंग्स आर नोन एज हिस्टोरिकल थियरीज. सो व्हाटसोएवर दे वर राइटिंग, it was based on this, marking. This was the basic design जिस पे वो डायनास्टीज की हिस्ट्री लिख रहे थे. हिस्टोरिकल थियरीज हर जगह पे आपको मिलेगी, ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ चाइना में थी. नाउ रिगार्डिंग द कंटिन्यूअस हिस्ट्री, सो एक डायनास्टी फॉल होगी, फिर दूसरी होगी, सो इट विल कंटिन्यू. हिस्ट्री विल नॉट एंड विद वन डायनास्टी. व्हेन जब इसका पतन हो जाएगा तो हिस्ट्री उसके साथ खत्म होगी, ऐसा नहीं था. इट विल कंटिन्यू. But you will see there the criticism to this theory was present in China as well. It's not that everybody was following this trend. उसके critics इस theory dynastic cycle के critic आपको चाइना में भी मिलेंगे, इस दौर में भी मिलेंगे. During the Tang and Shang periods, historians opposed its limitations and sought to break out of it. Because if you are claiming to be objective in your historiographical tradition, then you cannot follow such a path which is preconceived. That is against the objectivity. Because causes may differ. When we say that we are learning from the past, so a dynasty, they will also learn from the past and they will not repeat the same blunders which were done by the earlier. So the result will not be the same. How can we say that the result will be same? There is, you will see these are confronting statements. You are giving both the statements and there is conflict within them. Now, regarding the Sima Qian, he didn't openly discarded the dynastic framework. लेकिन कोई tradition जब establish होता है, it's not so easy to break it. इतना आसान नहीं होता है इसको break करना. आहिस्ते आहिस्ते इसमें changes आती हैं. So when we say about Sima Qian, his work, that's considered the most important work in the Chinese historiography, he didn't completely discarded this framework, but the scope of his work transcended any one dynasty. Others like Zheng Kyo directly criticized the venerable historian Ban Gu for having started the process of writing dynastic histories and openly espoused the notion of continuous history. So continuous history is actually the linear history. It's continuity. There is no break or pause. These are the causes. Events are taking place. They have the consequences. Consequences in turn become the causes for any other event, and it goes on. For example, in 1757, we have Battle of Plassey. That may be considered the beginning of colonialism, real territorial colonialism. We use the term territorial colonialism for that in India. So there were reasons for this. What were the reasons? The dastaks issued by Farrukhsiyar, which was a tax-free pass for the company, they were misused. That became the cause. Event was Battle of Plassey, and consequences were they conquered Bengal. This is colonization of Bengal. Then we have, it became the cause for the Battle of Buxar, for appointing the Nawabs now. That became the reason, that became the cause. So consequences became the cause for the next event. Then we have another event, that's Battle of Buxar, that led to the company fetched the Diwani rights of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa out of that. That was the consequence, and it led to actual colonialism. Now, we do not find any bullion flowing from Britain to India. Indian revenue was from this time onwards invested for the trade. So they were on the receiving end, they got the benefit. This was the consequence. It led to another event. So there is continuity of it. It means it goes in linear direction. There is no cyclical nature in it now. And it will be repeated. Another dynasty will begin, another. This was the system or theoretical framework was developed by Ban Gu. And we have the historians in China who openly criticized Ban Gu for beginning such practice. Okay. Whether there was any objectivity or integrity, yes. From the time of Sima Qian, it was considered the duty of every historian to record the facts. Now there was possibility whether they were able to write the facts completely or there was some degree of it, but it was expected that every historian will record the facts. After it, we come to the Indian historiography. Now, regarding the Indian historiography, at the periphery, we need to understand that initially the colonial historians, they considered that Indians were not having any sense of historiography. They never recorded anything, as we call it history. Now, if we understand histories as recording events that were regarded as significant by those who chronicled them, some of the earliest examples of these come from the Rig Veda. As I told you in one of the earliest slides that when we're discussing about Greco-Roman tradition, and I was telling you again and again, you need to remember it because we will come across the same theme in the Indian historiography later on. So if we mean by history recording the events of significance, then certainly we come across the first evidence of it, that is from Rig Veda itself, which dates back to 1500 BC, almost 1000 years before the Herodotus. These include verses that were identified as Dhanastutis. Dhanastuti literally means praise of gift. These were composed by the recipients who were priestess and usually mention the name of the donor. Here is an example. These verses are from the second hymn of 8th Mandal or book of the Rig Veda. So this is from the 8th Mandal. Okay. I think most of us are familiar about the 10th Mandal of Rig Veda. Can you tell me anything special about the 10th Mandal of Rig Veda? Why it's so famous? Most of the students of history remember only 10th Mandal of the Rig Veda and not the other mandals. Anybody among you? Monica Tripathi? Or Monu Sharma? Anybody? Can you tell me? क्या आप मुझे बता सकते हैं कि इन द हिस्टोरिकल स्टडीज ज्यादातर हम 10th मंडल को कोट करते हैं एंड नॉट द अदर मंडल्स ऑफ ऋग्वेदा? इसके लिए कोई रीजन? चलो गेस मैं आपको एक क्लू में आपको देता हूं. इट्स रिलेटेड टू द वर्ण सिस्टम that we often discuss in the ancient Indian history. Okay, it's because, let me tell you, it's because of the Purusha Suktam, which is in the 10th Mandal. So this is from the 8th Mandal and it's considered the earliest text. As you know, in the Rig Veda, it's believed that the 1st and the 10th Mandal, they are later additions, but this is the 8th Mandal and this is it belongs to the early Vedic period. That's from 1500 BC. So we have the narration of Dhanastuti. We have the example of Dhanastuti. So skilled is Yadu's son in giving precious wealth, he who is rich in herds of cattle. Now remember, it's very important. On what basis we say that the economy of the Vedic period was pastoral? It's on the basis of such descriptions. Rich in the herds of cattle. May he, Asanga's son, Suvandratha, obtain all joy and happiness. Asanga, the son of Playoga, has surpassed others by giving 10,000. I have got 10 bright colored oxen. So this is the first evidence of recording an event, because it was considered significant from the Brahmin who wrote it. So it's not that the Indian tradition is barren of such events, but what matters is the process, that which events will be recorded and which events will not be recorded. So if we consider the sense of historiography from the perspective that all those events which are important will be recorded. Then here is an example, and this example is known as Dhanastutis. Now it is perhaps worth reflecting on what would get recorded and why. This is very important. If you are recording anything, either you may consider it's very important for you, it's a great memory, or you are recording anything, it is important for your future. For example, we record the transactions, etc. Only what was regarded as positive, as desirable from the point of view of the Brahmana or the Kshatriya would find a place in such eulogies. So from the Dhanastutis, we understood that the event which has been recorded in this Dhanastuti was important for the Brahman. He was rejoicing this event. It was something that might have happened first time with him, so he has recorded it. But out of it, we can find the social information as well as the economic information about the Vedic people. So it becomes a source for the historians later on. That's why we consider Rigveda as a source for understanding the socio-economic as well as political scenario of the Vedic period. I hope it's clear till here. यहाँ तक clear है? कोई question? यहाँ तक कोई question? कोई doubt? You may raise your hand if there's any question, or like Monica and others, you may share the question in the chat as well. Or I hope you have the options regarding the mic as well. You can unmute the mic and ask the question if there's any. And do remember, at the end, we are going to share a test, and I hope everybody will try to attempt that. Okay. Second is the epic. Now we have two epics, especially two epics. We have Mahabharat and Ramayana. Among these, Mahabharata is traditionally considered or recognized as itihasa, history. Whereas Ramayana, it's considered a Mahakavya, which is a great poem. These are the genres. When we use the term epics, this is a genre in literature, Sanskrit literature. Now, the kernel of the stories contained in the epics may date back to the early centuries of the first millennium BC, but the texts were finally written down much later, 4th, 5th centuries Common Era. It's not that these were written exactly when the events were taking place. They were written later on. Till then, they passed through the oral tradition. They passed from generation to generation orally. Now, what is historical in them? That's very important. As long as our today's lecture is concerned. So both these epics, they contain genealogies. They tell us about dynasties. And it's somehow related to the Chinese tradition, because we have the dynastic histories there. So when we have the genealogies, they tell us about the dynasties, various dynasties. The Mahabharata contains the genealogies of the lunar Chandravamsha, while the Ramayana contains the genealogy of the solar Surya Vansha lineage. Several ruling families in the early medieval period traced descent from these lineages. You will see, even in the early medieval period, we come across the dynasties, especially the Rajputs, who claimed their ancestry from the Chandravansham or Suryavansham. So they were the lineages, they were not the ruling dynasties. You will find so many dynasties who belong to this lineage, and they are ruling the different parts of the country at the same time. So it's not exactly as we come across in the Chinese historiography. The Kurus and Panchalas in general are mentioned in later Vedic literature, first half of the first millennium, while both of these lineages were important in the Mahabharata. So in the Mahabharata, in addition to the dynasties or the lineages, we have personal information as well. We have information, various features related to persons, like regarding Bhim, regarding Pandavas, regarding Kauravas, special personalities we have. But we have the narration of these events, that this thing happened, it happened like this, and this was the consequence. Okay. That's why we consider them historical and we fetch information from them. Now there is very important thing, that's Puranic genealogies. And here I would like to you all to remember that in the Chinese historiography we came across dynastic circle. So here we have the concept of time, it was different. So regarding the time, we have already divided into 4 great epochs. And all this we find in the Purans. They were like the epics. We have the antecedents of the Purans. So we have 3 types of genealogies in the Purans. We have the lineages of the sages. That's more related to the spiritual aspect. Now, it worked as a legitimizing agent for the transmission of knowledge. For example, if anybody is considered knowledgeable and he is belonging to this lineage, then it's authenticated. The other genealogies are those of rulers. These in turn are divided into 2 categories: those that predate the onset of the Kali Yuga and those of rulers who are post Kali Yuga. Other 2 types are the rulers. It's related to the political domain, and we have the mention of the kings or the lineages who will rule or who ruled before the onset of the Kali Yuga, as well as those who ruled after the onset of the post Kali Yuga period. So we have divided the time in 4 yugas, 4 great epochs. So the initial yug, that is Sat Yuga. This is the age of truth, virtue, and righteousness. Remember that these are moral aspects. There is no mention of material. From the material perspective, Kali Yuga is greater because we have all the facilities. We will see, sometimes you may ponder upon it, that why we say that Satyuga was great and this is not a great yuga. So remember that this comparison is made on the basis of morality and not on the basis of material. Then we have Treta. This is the age of mankind and represents a 1/4 decline in spirituality. So it means there is decline. From Satyug towards Treta, there is 1/4 decline. With the passage of time, when you are approaching towards Kali Yuga, there is continuous decline in the morality as well as spirituality. Likewise, we have Dwapar, then we have Kali Yuga or Kali Yuga. This Kali Yuga, it's considered the age of conflict. Now, this age of conflict we come across about it in the wars that took place in the later part of ancient Indian history, towards the beginning of early medieval period. That was Kali Yuga. Now we will try to analyze some features of these Purans. Like we have a verse about the Gupta rulers, and we need to remember that they ruled in the North India from 5th century. So kings born of the Gupta family will enjoy. Here you will see that there is future tense uses. So it's in the future. All these territories which are Prayaga on the Ganga, Saketa and Magadha. So regarding the Guptas in the Purans, we have it's like a prophecy that they will enjoy. For example, if they have acquired all these regions, Purans legitimize them. In a manner, it's legitimization of the Guptas to conquer the regions that are mentioned in the Purans. Here you will see there is future sense, future tense has been used. It means it will happen. And from the Purans, it may be taken as a legitimization for the rulers. Now, what was the reason for the compilation of these genealogies or the Purans? It's also evident from this future, will enjoy. So it was legitimation of the kings. And for that very purpose, you will see that future tense has been used. When it's legitimizing the kings, as we came across in the Chinese historiographical tradition, that aim of the compilation of the history was to legitimize the king as well as the dynasty. So the use of future here, it signifies the same thing. Whether they were commissioned by the rulers in order to legitimize their rule or something else. In addition to the simple legitimization, even we have the mention of the regions which will be conquered by these rulers or by this dynasty. For example, in case of the Guptas who ruled in the 5th century Common Era, we have the modern day Prayag as well as other regions like Saketa, that's eastern Uttar Pradesh, and Magadha, whole Gangetic region. And we know that this was practically the domain of the Guptas. Okay. So here we see the future sense, and it makes us to feel that they were compiled to legitimize the rule of some rulers. Now we have some interesting features in it as well. The name of the rulers that we find in the Purans, some of them are known from the other historical sources as well, like we have the mention of these rulers in the inscriptions, as well as we have the numismatic reference as well. But at the same time, there are some rulers who are known from genealogies, who are known from the Purans, but we do not find their mention in any historical record or any historical source. One of the typical example in this regard may be cited in case of the Satvahans. We do not find the mention of Satvahans as Satvahans in the Purans. Rather, we find the term Andhras. But from the historical sources, from the inscriptions, as well as the coins, we have the Satvahans. So these are some interesting things that we have regarding these Puranic traditions. We'll go on. Second thing is we have the courtly traditions. Now these court traditions, they were written in ornate Sanskrit. And we have a lot of, extreme use of similes, metaphors, and other strategies to render the text weighty. Ornate nature of these texts simply means that their sole aim was to please the king, to fetch the pleasure of the king, to fetch the favors of the king. And that's why, from the historical perspective, they are considered to a large extent as barren. So these were generally the eulogies. Now, among this type of sources in Indian history, we have the Prasasti or eulogy of Samudragupta, which is known by Prayag Prasasti, and it's also known as Allahabad Pillar inscription, because the inscription is on an Ashokan pillar, and it was composed by Harisena. One of the features of the Prayag Prasasti you will see, okay, okay, you do not find the mention of only Samudragupta, but the rulers he vanquished. It means he eternalized the kings whom he vanquished as well. And it helped us a lot to understand the contemporary political scenario of the 5th century Common Era. Another source that we have, that's known as Charit, and these were written for the kings or for some persons of extreme importance, as we have Buddha Charitra, and it envisages the different aspects of the Buddha. Among the Charit, we have the best one, that's known as Harsha Charitra, which was composed by Bhanabhat. This was also a court tradition, and it tells about the different aspects of the Harsha. So it's limited towards the to the eulogy of the king, and it hardly provides any authentic information, but it helps us to understand the period. But we cannot say that it's totally objective. Here's this is what Bhanabhatta has written about Harsha. It's about his feet were very red as if with wrath at subordinate kings, and they shed a bright ruby light on the crowded crests of the prostrate monarchs. So it shows about the majesty of the Harsha, that how great he was for the friends and how dangerous or ruthless he was for the foes. Now, these histories are charitras like Harsha Charitra. They were commissioned. They were being written for a king. They were being written to please the king. So there is least room for the fact. But we cannot say there isn't any fact. There may be facts. Sometimes the facts were presented in quite ornate manner. But we cannot, count them as totally unbiased. But rather, there is much bias in it, because they cannot record any misdeed of the king. That's the problem that makes it, from objective perspective of history, totally barren. Now we have very important thing. What will be our conclusion? What we have learned from this lecture? That's, we have two different traditions of historiography. One is ancient Indian. I have used the term ancient Indian because from the early medieval period, we have fine historiographical, tradition that developed in India, that fulfills almost the objective nature, because we have both the courtly chronicles, we have the eulogies, but at the same time we have the neutral accounts as well, in which the objectivity reflects. Ancient Indian historiographical tradition, only those events were recorded which were considered important, and there was no tradition or theoretical framework for recording such events as we came across in the Dhanastutis in the Rig Veda. So it was cyclical. It was known that what will happen, what is going to happen. Time was important, and it decided the nature of the events later on. In the meantime, I'm sharing the quiz link. Just a second. Quiz link will be shared, and I expect all the students to respond to that ASAP before the conclusion of this lecture. So I would like to request Asim sir, can you please share the link with the students?
Okay, sir.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So I hope all the students will respond to the questionnaire or the test instantly. Okay. So here you will see that in ancient Indian tradition of history, it was cyclical. Time was important. Satyug, it was the era of the virtue. It was era of the morality. And with the passage of time, there was decline in the morality. So it was pre-decided that what will happen, what is going to happen. Everything was known. That's why to record the events or the causes of the events, it was not considered necessary. What was considered necessary was the time. So the link has been shared. If it's visible, kindly confirm whether it's visible to you. Is it visible to you? The link has been shared for the test. All the students will, I think everybody is able to see the link, right? Can you confirm? Monica, Benjamin, anybody? Whether it's visible to you or not? Okay, thanks for confirmation. That's why it was cyclical. If any event is taking place, it's having causes. So all these things are known, what will happen, what is going to happen. That's why it was not recorded as it was recorded in the Greek tradition. And that's why from the historical perspective, this notion, the notion of Western notion of history, according to it, we never followed any tradition of historiography. That's why when they use the term that we were not having any sense of the historiography, it's because of this reason, that the Indians believed in cyclical nature. They believed in time that Satyug will end, then Treta will begin, then Dwapar, then Kalyug, and there will be the way this violence, complete collapse of the morality in the Kalyuga. So it was pre-decided. So there was no reason to go for the causes, event, and the consequences of it. But it's more related to that spiritual domain. Whereas the Western notion was linear. So we have an event, it has a cause. For example, here I have quoted the Battle of Plassey, so I discussed it. Let me quote another event. For example, we have the 1857 revolt. So the cause, there were so many causes, but one of the immediate cause was the greased cartridges that led to the revolt of 1857, and its consequences were that the rule of the company ended. Now India came under direct control of the crown. That was the consequence. And because of that, we have so many events that succeeded it, which were having their own causes, consequences, and it continued. That's what we say continuous process. But here it's cyclical. We know what will happen, what's going to happen. Such things will happen, such things will happen. It's like predecisive. There is no need of any cause that will lead to an event. Okay, so it's like that. So that's all we have regarding this lecture. If there is any question now, I would like all the participants, if you are able to unmute your mic, you can raise your questions or queries if there is any specific question as well. कोई सवाल किसी का भी? Any questions? No. 100% तो बिल्कुल भी नहीं कर सकते. Especially what will decide it? It is whether, for example, we have the history that is related to more recent period, of which we have almost all the sources available. We have access to those aspects. We can explore those aspects completely. But still, it's difficult to go for the 100% objectivity. There is objectivity, but there is always, room for the probability as well. Even, for example, the most recent, that's why we have different views on the events. Okay. Is it clear, Manisha? Okay. Any other question? The most important thing that makes us to say so is that, for example, when the history is written, when any event takes place, so the causes that led to that event, they had different interpretations. You will see it in our daily life as well. Whatsoever happens with you, everybody is not able to understand that the essence, the real nature of the cause that lead to some event which is related to you. Only you know it. Everyone else will not be able to know it as you know it. That's why we say there is room for the probability. So there's a feedback form as well. You can record it. If we want to read the history of a country, from which place or which books we should read. This is what we need to learn. For example, if we are taking a book in our hand and we have started to read it and we believe this is the true history, it means we are misled. I think we need to, if you're asking about the starting point, then in fact it's a Veda. It's from there, but that's related to spirituality. But within that spiritual context, you will find the political, social, or economic information. Okay, begin with that. And we need to read many books where different aspects of the history have been explored, so that we can reach to a concrete conclusion out of that. From one book, it's not possible to reach a conclusion. That's without bias, not from one book, because in a condition when we do not have many sources available with us, and we do not have a fine tradition of historiography as well, it's very difficult. So we have to look for it. We have to, try to find the references from various sources, whether they are religious sources, they are secular. Okay. So from these sources, that's why it becomes a bit difficult. but certainly from Vedas. That's the beginning point. Exactly the beginning point. No, there will be no confusion. There will be no confusion. Actually, you will see they have reached to some conclusion. You will compare the conclusion, and out of those conclusions, but because there are the parameters, you will always scrutinize whatsoever they have said on the historical objectivity, whether they are fulfilling the criteria that's laid in the historical objectivity. There's no confusion when we read many books. No, not at all. For example, regarding the Indus Valley civilization, the reasons, whether it was Aryan invasion, it was something else, you can understand that which is more logical, which is the more logical interpretation or the reason cited. Okay. Is it clear, Manisha? Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. Welcome.
Well, this was a session that surely has widened our thinking horizon on historiography. I would like to extend a vote of thanks to our speaker, Dr. Ashraf, for enriching our knowledge on the topic, and to all you participants for active participation. I would also like to thank Ginni ma'am, Senior Director of Center for Distance and Online Education, and Manish sir, the Additional Director of Center for Distance and Online Education. At the end, I would like to request all the attendees to fill in the feedback form so that we can work on improving these sessions in the future. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot.